an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Magicians, Season 5, Episode 3, The Mountain of Ghosts. In this episode, things get pretty emotional up in this bitch. This is one of the first times that we've really seen Fen angry. I feel like it's, if not the first time, it's been a minute. And I was here for it. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Jessie for commissioning this episode. Jessie is in the chat. Hi, Jessie. So, yeah, this episode was a lot. The main thing that got to me was the scene between Alice and Eliot at the end, of course, because it's, Alice has just been a real hit or miss for me. There are times when her storyline works. There are times when her character works. And then there are times where I just find her really irritating. I don't know if it's the actress. I don't know if it's the script and the way she's written. But I just have a hard time connecting with her. And the scene where she manages to connect with someone else that I've grown to feel like I understand much better. I feel like he was sort of the middleman for connecting her to me a little bit, because she has been so very isolated from all the other characters so much of the time. It's often been Alice on her own, doing her own thing, not wanting to get involved in whatever, finally getting roped into it, kind of against her will or against her better judgment. And, eventually she betrays them all. She goes off and is working with a library and then is in prison with the library. And there's just been a lack of connection because Quentin served as the bridge between her and the rest of the Break Bills kids. And with him gone, I think this was a smart move because they needed to get her integrated with everyone else. The only other person that could have served this purpose was Julia. And Julia is, it's a different situation for her than it is with Eliot, because he was her friend rather than somebody that she was romantically involved with. And she has someone now. She's with Penny. And not to say that if you are grieving and you have a significant other, it doesn't count. That's not what I'm saying at all. But when you have someone in your life to help carry it for you, it helps a lot. It really does. Grieving alone is really tough. And there are times, even when you have someone in your life who cares about you, that it still feels like you're alone, especially if it didn't mean to them what it did to you. But having it be Eliot, someone who also had a relationship with Quentin in a very, very similar way to how Alice had her relationship work out, it just feels like the connection that they have means something different. And I am so glad that he wound up telling her, because I appreciate her response to him so deeply, which is, do you think that I didn't know that there was more to you than friendship? Do you think I didn't know Quentin was really complicated? And do you think that I was going to just demand that he only love me? And I love that, because for many of us who are in what we have been traditionally taught are the correct relationships, which is monogamous relationships, it is something that we demand and we fully expect others to demand of us. So when you are with a person who doesn't see it that way, or you don't see it that way, it can be difficult to adjust to. And I think that Eliot is somebody who understands having complicated relationships and being in basically poly relationships. But he didn't expect Alice to understand that or respect that. And I love that she's not saying, oh yeah, I would have shared him with you. That's not exactly it. But she understands that you can't just ask someone to turn off how they feel for another person. And that regardless of what was going on between Eliot and Quentin doesn't diminish what was going on between her and Quentin. Because I think a lot of people see love as a finite resource. That if someone is giving their love to another person, that means there is less love left for you. And that's just not how that works. That's not to say that if you are somebody who wants to be in a monogamous relationship, that you don't have the right to ask for that. You absolutely get to draw whatever boundaries and parameters for your relationships that you want. But I do think that we have a very limited understanding, like in society, of how love works, unfortunately. And we are a lot of times sort of unwilling to open ourselves up to the concept of it being different because we want love to be something that we can define and quantify and therefore hold on to as a sort of like life raft in a way. And it just, you can't fit it in boxes usually. It's messy. It goes all over the place, you know? And I say this as somebody who's monogamous, you know, I don't think I could handle having somebody else taking Owen's attention away from me. And that's something, like I say, people think if you have love and someone gives some of their love to someone else, it means there's less left for you. But attention, there is a finite amount that a person can muster up, you know? And when I'm in a relationship, I tend to pick guys who are workaholics. And so the amount of attention they have to spare is very limited. And I don't want to share the little bit that I get with anyone else. So that's where I fall on that. And I sort of enjoy a dude who's a little bit possessive. So I don't think that I would like be attracted in the first place to a guy who was fine with me being with other people. So for me, it just sort of like shakes out that way. But I have no judgment at all about people who aren't in monogamous relationships. I know a lot of people who are. I have some very close friends who are. And it really works for them. It seems fine. So if everybody involved is like aware of what's going on, I don't see any, you know, I feel like it's an intelligent way oftentimes of approaching relationships because it requires more communication in a lot of ways than we're used to having, because we do take it so for granted when we're monogamous that the other person knows what that means and agrees to it and blah, blah, blah. And if you are dealing with multiple people and you have to lay boundaries and stuff, that can sort of foster a sense of more openness and honesty in that direction than otherwise. All of that to say that Alice is just much more willing to accept everything about Quentin. She says, if I loved him, I have to love all of him. And even the parts that I don't really understand or that were difficult. And I love that so much. That is something I wish we could all wrap our heads around more. We want people in our lives, oftentimes, that we love to be different than what they are. And if you really love a person, you've got to let them be who they are. Or you don't love them. You love an idea of who they could be. And that's just not respectful of them, you know? And I needed Eliot to put it out there and get the validation that his relationship was also important. Because honestly, Eliot's being pretty selfless initially, wanting to sort of hide what happened out of respect for Alice, and like understanding that she is going through this terrible thing and not wanting to sort of like take that away from her or diminish that. And I get his instinct there. I understand why he like feels that that's what this would look like. And for many people, it might look that way if they didn't really understand the person they were with. I don't think Eliot's off base in anticipating that sort of reaction. But I think that he needed to acknowledge his own grief. I think he kept sort of like back burnering it because he didn't think it was as worthy or counted as much, because a lot of it was based around his experience in a timeline that he can only partially remember. So for him, there's a bit of like uncertainty there. You know, I know it happened and I feel it, but if I try to explain to somebody, they're going to be like, well, it didn't exactly happen then, did it? So it doesn't count. And I think he thinks if someone else were to tell him what he's experienced, he knows he would react with that sort of dismissive, well, it didn't really happen then either. And so he's doing that to himself. He's second guessing himself, and he's diminishing his own grief. And I'm so glad that they managed to connect over their mutual grief and love for this person, rather than that being something that pushes them apart or makes them resent one another or feel like, oh, you're trying to outdo me in my grief. You know, this was a really beautiful, mature moment that I didn't expect. I didn't really have an expectation, to be honest. I didn't know what would be her reaction. And I didn't really stop to like think through how she would behave with that. But it was really nice to see them handling this like adults. And I was so glad to see what wound up happening with that letter, because it turns out he didn't send it. And he winds up dropping it down the well at the end. And I just thought that was like a really nice nod to letting go and it being a nice symbol, because she had the symbol of the piece of his soul that she was holding on to. Not on purpose, but in a way, yes, on purpose. So anyway, I just wanted to start off talking about that because I just thought that scene was so beautiful. So we start off with her sitting on the stairs with Quentin, having the conversation that the two of them had before he died, like the day before he died or earlier in the day. And she's chatting with him, telling him, I think we work best together. He's giving her this look of just like, you know, and says that he likes the sound of that. And all of a sudden she looks around and he is gone. And then she wakes up, which, guys, if you have lost someone, these dreams are the worst. There is no getting across what it is like. For, in my case, to have a dream about my dad and wake up and be like, oh my God, I can't believe I haven't talked to him in a while. I got to call him. And then remember. And it happens. It's grown less and less over the past couple of years. But when somebody initially goes, it happens a lot. And it's really mean. I think some people see it as a gift. I know that, you know, my mother, she says it's them visiting you. I can't feel that usually. I am just angry. And I want to see it as a gift and like they visited, but it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like something got taken. And I woke up to remember that it's been stolen. and I just get angry. And that seems to be the feeling that Alice has, you know. So she wakes up. Her mom has left her a message to water her plants. She goes outside and she sees this light floating and shimmering in this area of the garden that is burned, it looks like. And I don't know if it's supposed to be that burying the golem killed everything here, or that it's the fragment of soul that sort of like burned it up, or what. But it is a desolate spot, and I can't help but think we're going to hear from her mother about this. And she digs up the bottle. It turns out that the piece of soul that she used to bring this golem to life, she assumed when she buried the golem and put it to rest that the piece of soul would return automatically to wherever Quentin is, that it would go back to him. And it doesn't do that. So now she has to figure out how to bring it back. So then we cut to Fillory. And this was a very surprising turn of events. So they're opening champagne for Margo. And she's like, why? And they said, we wanted to honor you. When Julia sent us the bunny saying that they put the clock in here, we asked them to stock up on celebratory beverages. I love this so much. But it turns out that they are giving her all of the credit for sending this message, this letter, that told Josh to go and slide basically to the center of the planet and give that dude a ham sandwich and then go forward in time. I completely forgot about how Eliot said, I tried a thing, it didn't work. That has to be what this was, right? And I assumed that Margo was like, okay, I'm going to tell Josh to do this thing because I want to be with Josh, and I'll figure out the whole thing with my kingdom later. But it's more important to me that these guys get to join up with us again. And it turns out I was wrong. She did indeed give Josh and Fen up for lost, and was only trying to get her kingdom back. And honestly, like, I can't decide if I'm proud or disappointed. A part of me is a little disappointed because I liked the idea of her loving Josh that much. But on the other hand, I didn't really want Margo to be somebody who would give up her career. And I put that in quotes because, like, this doesn't feel like it should fall under that heading, but it kind of does. For her man. I wanted her to be committed to the welfare of everyone and to be willing to make major sacrifices like that in order to do what was right for everybody. So finding out that she didn't actually send the letter that got them back, I thought that she just lied to Eliot about what was in the letter. And it turns out she told him the truth, but he just didn't explain to her what the first thing he tried was. And I think I'm proud of her. I understand Fen's reaction later. I really do. But I kind of think that is the Margo that I know. That's the Margo that I've come to know over the course of this show. And her deciding to throw all of that away and just trust that she'll eventually get Fillory back some other way. As much as I would have been willing to believe that, it didn't quite feel like her to me. So I was like, okay, you know what? I was willing because it's sweet. But I think I do like this better. And she is talking to Eliot about the fact that she's getting all of the credit for doing this thing that he did. And he's like, yeah, but I'm your advisor. I was working on your behalf. So it might not have been your direct action, but it still was you, and you still do get the credit. And as much as, like, I know that she feels like he's just saying this as a workaround, that is how this shit tends to work, politically speaking. I mean, he's not totally wrong. And I don't know. I thought it was surprising that she didn't want to take this credit. Like, I understand overall feeling like, well, that's not exactly right. But I do think that it makes, I think that had he mentioned to her what he was thinking of trying, why don't we just send them a note to eat to send out this ham sandwich to this guy so that he can eat it and be happy and then send them forward, she would have endorsed that and been like, oh my God, duh, that's a great idea. Why don't we just do that? And it's simply that he didn't, like, tell her or share with her about that. She didn't remember that that was an option. So there's this sort of behavior as if she's like, she was willing to sacrifice them and Eliot wasn't. When I'm like, yeah, but there was an option that Eliot was remembering that she had forgotten, and that's just not really her fault. Like, I also had forgotten. Full disclosure. And of course, when somebody has an option that another person doesn't know they have, they're going to be able to exercise that. And I don't feel like she should get as side-eyed as she is by Fen later. Now, granted, they don't know that she had forgotten about that contingency, that possibility. They think that, I guess, she just wasn't willing to send that message to them. But maybe she will explain. Maybe she'll get a chance to. I don't know. Because Fen is sort of like behaving as if, oh, I guess you didn't give a shit about us. And that's not true. Fen can't know it's not exactly true because she wasn't there and she didn't see the other attempts that Margo made. But we know all of the things that she tried. And for her to have this accusation leveled at her that she didn't give a fuck about the two of them, it's not fair. And it's not accurate. And it is sort of, I think, a little bit short-sighted of Fen because she is only thinking about her and Josh's importance to Margo and not the fact that Margo is working to save the entire kingdom. And I wish that she would keep that in mind. I should mention again that I have talked more than once about Margo's lip color, and I have begun to realize that part of why it looks so amazing is because they put like this bluish filter over everything. So that changes the color of the lip color that she's wearing. So I will never find a lip color like this unless I like mix it myself, probably, because even she isn't wearing the color it looks like she's wearing. So what can you do? Life isn't fair. And by the way, they're standing in the apartment on Earth as this happens. They are not in Fillory. And when Alice comes in, Eliot, he runs over and is like, hey, what are you doing? And she tries to sidestep him and just be like, oh, whatever, I'm just doing a thing. And she says, I'm fine. I just have to do it alone. And he puts his hand over the clock so that she can't go through. And when he finds out that she took a piece of his soul, he gets so angry. I really appreciate his response, his reaction. He is so... It's a combination of indignation and fear. Like, what if she can't put it back? I really feel like this actor, the one who plays Eliot, just got a lot to do this episode. He is so often just this languid, pretending to be disinterested, unruffleable addict. And I like when he gets to be sincere like this. I really like when he has moments of genuine emotion that he gets to play with. So she says that she's going to the Mountain of Ghosts, and he says the one that I think Roger Chatwin was headed to before the band of aggressive talking squirrels kidnapped him. I'm finally reading the books. Margo has been on my ass about it. The one with the hole at the top that goes all the way down to the underworld. So she plans to drop this bottle down, and I guess hope that it just gets to him. And he insists on coming with her. She tries to say that she has to do it alone, but he will not hear of it. And eventually we see the two of them prepping for this hike. And the man who's leading them is supposed to be an expert on getting up there and dealing with the takers who are still like at large. And we get to meet one of them eventually. Which actually, since that whole storyline is kind of self-contained, I guess I'll just like talk about their sections of it. He finds out that the two of them are grieving and is not excited about taking them. But I thought it was weird that he would think anybody but grievers wants to go to the Mountain of Ghosts, considering what it is. And he says something about how you're going to be out of shape to go on this trip because you've just been sitting around grieving and eating cake, which I did find really funny. I mean, grief has a different effect on all of us. Some of us like overcompensate with work and whatnot to distract ourselves. So that's not always the case, but it can be. And we have this really nice fight that is the prelude to her and Eliot seeing eye to eye at the end. And I liked that. Them seeing eye to eye at the end would not have worked if they didn't if they didn't have this confrontation first. Because she tries to say, this is really my pilgrimage. It's not my fault that you're not having a good time. And he says, what do you mean? And she says, I'm putting my boyfriend to rest and you tagged along. And he does that thing that I love, which is laughs when he's angry. You can see the laugh here when he's angry, and he laughs later when he's about to cry out of grief. And just saying, that is extremely relatable. I react with laughter a lot. And he says, right, because I barely knew him. She says, you know what I mean. You're here out of some sort of combination of thinking I'm incompetent and your guilt that he died saving you. And he says, oh, okay. I know you're not as stupid to believe that whole thing, like, and say it by accident. So I have to assume that you are fucking joking. She says, no, I'm not. This is hard enough without you judging me every step of the way. Is that how you don't bicker? Because that would explain a lot about you and Q falling apart beyond the obvious, of course. And she says the obvious, and she says, what, like drunk threesomes with you and Margo? And he goes, solid point. But I was thinking more the one time where you betrayed all of us. I ended up possessed and Q died cleaning up the mess. And then he sort of comes back and says, all right, I'm sorry. That was a little harsh. And she says, and correct. And he says, well, but you saved my life. And she's like, yeah, I did. While trying to fix the mess that I made. So here we are again. I don't know what to tell you. And I just thought that this was really, like, she is behaving initially like she doesn't know that there was something more between him and Quentin. She doesn't want to share. And people can be like this. They can be jealous and possessive of their grief. They can feel like if other people share in it, it doesn't mean the same thing, that only they understand. And it helps to feel that way sometimes because you don't need to let anyone in. But I just liked how this evolved, and I just thought it was really well done. Meanwhile, their tour guide, Yan, is rolling a cigarette, and as they look up at him, and all of a sudden he gets whisked away by a taker. It's a really sudden, like, hand around the side of his face, pulling him behind the tree. We wind up seeing the taker later that tries to steal the piece of Quentin's soul, because as Yan tells them, the takers don't just take whatever's around, and they don't just take people. They know whatever is valuable to you, and they'll go after it because they can sense that. So they go after the piece of Quentin's soul because they can, like, feel that that has value. And when Eliot chases it down, it does not react at all to the magic that he sends at it. And it's a really freaky looking, like, it's got a sort of a zombie look to it, but it's like not a rotting away zombie. It's more like the zombies in all I keep thinking of is like I Am Legend, where they were like still, they weren't just unthinking, shambling corpses. They were sort of people who had been transformed into these vampiric creatures. And that is very much what this thing looks like. It's got no hair. It's got these long, weird, blackened fingers. And when he uses his battle magic, nothing happens. It's finally on top of him and about to kill him or do something to him. And all of a sudden it gets shot off him. And this smoke begins pouring out of its mouth, almost like it's vomiting. And it tries to stand up, and it begins to sort of get consumed by this cloud of smoke, and it completely disappears. And this dude walks up. My initial instinct at seeing this guy was, what's up? Because he's pretty cute. That was immediately followed up by, oh no. Because he has the look that a lot of villains have had on this show. And by that I mean a very tidily cropped white guy who is like looks like he's probably in his like mid to late 30s and has a sort of wholesome aspect to his face. And that type of dude has been, I mean, I'm thinking of, what's his face in the first season who is possessed and then is the trickster god whose name I can't remember, Reynard, who had that sort of look. There's a kid that winds up, he is like apparently possessed by the beast, we find out later, who had hooked up with Eliot. And I don't want to call him a villain, but he was somebody who just seemed like so cute and sweet. And then he turns out to be, you know, up to something nefarious. And then there was somebody else more recently who I'm thinking of. But yeah, so once I like got a better look at him, I was sort of like, oh dear, I bet this is not a good dude. And we wind up finding out a little bit later that he is the Dark King. Now, I think most of us probably figured out who this dude was pretty quick. Because he's here on this pilgrimage, but when, you know, Alice points out, how did you do this? Because most people don't have magic to be able to handle the takers. Only, as far as we know, the Dark King seems to know how to manage them. He sort of says, like, well, you know, where I come from, we were taught some secret things. He doesn't exactly lie, you know. He says most things don't work. Let's see. The Dark King can fend them off. And he says there are a few of us here who figured out ways. That's what he says. So he says, when it touched me, it felt like a virus, a plague. I shot something off on instinct, an antiviral. And he tells them that his family is from like magicians back on Earth. And that's where he's originally from. And when he was just this like sort of shady about exactly when she mentions the Dark King at all, I was kind of like, okay, yeah, this is the Dark King. And it takes a while for that reveal, but I thought it was done pretty well. He doesn't just like turn around and be like, all right, you guys are arrested. He doesn't do anything outright evil. He meets up with his people who happen to be waiting for him, and they pick him up, and he puts on his cloak, and he's like, do you want to ride? No? All right, well, I guess I'll see you around. And just takes off. And there's something much more like unnerving about that. It just felt really, I don't know. It makes it so that he's much more of a person and less a figure of swirling shadow and darkness. You know, when you hear him called the Dark King, you feel like there has to be something to that. But we don't see it yet. We just have this reputation that we hear about him and his title, but we don't know exactly what it is that has led them to think he is a bad person. And I trust, usually, the opinion of, like, when somebody gets that sort of reputation, I usually am like, all right, I'm sure there's something to it. But now I'm beginning to wonder because, I mean, he is a shit stirrer. Eliot points it out when he keeps on being like, why shouldn't Alice know? Why does she get to be spared that? Because you have to like watch her and her grief. Why shouldn't she have to watch you and your grief? And Eliot says, I think you're a bit of a shit stirrer. And he sort of laughs. And then he backs off and says, all right, well, I better go to sleep. And there's a real sense that there was a connection between the two of them and that they sort of considered maybe they would sleep together here. And I like that. That's the last line we get from Eliot this section is, I almost fucked the Dark King. And it's really something to write home about. I mean, damn. And he tells Eliot about his partner, and that because that's who he's come to mourn, and asks Eliot if you've ever had love. And he says it in a way that makes me think that he knows already. I don't know how he would. I don't know anything about this guy, so I don't know what kind of information he has. But it felt something like he knew already. I don't know. And that it felt like he was sort of leading Eliot to talking about Quentin in order to get him to tell Alice about the whole thing. But yeah, it's a weird scene. And I've already talked about the scene between him and Alice at the end. Eventually, like, she drops his spirit, but eventually they drop the letter together. And he seems to feel some relief at doing that. And now I'm going to back up. I'm going to talk about what's going on with Julia, actually, first. She and Penny are attempting to find this woman who apparently is really good at predicting surges, because they're trying to discover when that one that may wind up, destroying the world may potentially happen. And they go to see this woman and walk into the building where they are supposed to have an appointment, but they don't. And it looks like the physical kid's cottage. And I am extremely suspicious of the fact that maybe it looks like this because we just didn't want to spend more on a set for this episode. I don't know, but I just found that really amusing. So Zoe comes up to them, and she turns out to be sort of the face of things. And she manages what's going on with her sister. And it's very funny because Zoe has an extremely modern look. She's wearing this beautiful black and white sheath dress and has, the earrings and just is really, just like I said, modern, chic. And then it turns out Daniela, who they actually want to speak to, and who apparently has this ability, Daniela is much more she sort of looks like she's from Hidden Figures, actually, being a black woman wearing a sort of like 60s vaguely outfit. She has like the horn-rimmed glasses, a kind of a high-waisted, like calf-length skirt. She's much more reserved and just has a much nerdier sort of overall look and quality. And Julia explains why they are looking for information about this. And she says, we need Daniela to predict what's going to happen. We'll pay what we can. We would like you to help us save the world. And Daniela says, I'd love to help, but unfortunately, I must decline. Stay as long as you like. And she walks out without giving them any explanation why she must decline. And Julia is really frustrated. Penny is just sort of like, whatever, you know what? We'll figure out another way to do this. But as they're walking out, Daniela pops up behind them. She's been obviously using magic to hide herself. And she was standing right there watching the whole time and seems very concerned about the way her sister handled it. She looks over in her sister's direction with an expression of disapproval. And she winds up coming to them on her own and offering to help. But Zoe is really unhappy with the fact that Julia and Penny are continuing to ask for help. As she puts it, we lost our other sister. There was a third sister. In our effort to save the world, we get to be done. Because they come back. And Zoe is really mad about the fact that they even dared to come back at all. Daniela is sitting there reading and makes herself disappear at the sight of them. But yeah, basically Julia's like, once they talk later and she raises her objections again, Julia's like, dude, I understand that you lost somebody, but we did too. Everybody has lost somebody. We got to do the right thing here. This leads to a pretty intriguing conversation between her and Penny later. Basically, Penny's like, look, I'm not saying that we shouldn't keep doing what we're doing. I'm on board with this. But when she said we get to be done, that's a pretty compelling and interesting argument. Do we have any idea when we are done? Do we get to, just settle and have normal lives? What exactly is our plan long term? Because I would like to be able to just have a life with you. And Julia says, I want that too. And he interrupts and says, I'm not sure you do. And then it immediately follows up with, and that's okay. But we need to know that. And I really like that. Like, there's always going to be another crisis. There's always going to be another catastrophe on the horizon. And when do you get to sort of just be like, you know what? This just can't be my responsibility anymore. I've given so much. I've done so much. I have spent and invested so much energy. When do you get to do that? I don't know. I thought that was a really intriguing question. And the fact that he thinks that Julia isn't really interested in having the kind of life that he does, that he wants. I mean, I'm wondering where that comes from, why he thinks that. Is it because of her eagerness to do this sort of thing? Is it because she's wanting a quest and seems to be very committed to that? I should mention, too, that he still has that block up, that patch, which is giving him headaches, in order to keep from hearing that sound that one student had, like, ringing through her. And I have to assume that has something to do with the surges, but I don't know. So yeah, eventually Danielle comes to talk to them and gives them essentially a statistical forecast that gives, she thinks, like a general idea in 2 weeks that there's going to be another anomaly akin to the anomalies that caused Pompeii and the sinking of Atlantis, the extinction of the dinosaurs, and the invention of autotune. And she says circumstances will be exceptionally favorable, which in this case is not a good thing because it falls in a surge window. Castings will be exponentially magnified. Death toll in the millions, maybe much higher. And she says, unless you stop the surges, change astrology, or tell everyone on Earth not to do magic. If whatever you do, you need help, I will help you, and so will my sister. And Julia says, I don't think she wants to. And she's like, oh no, she doesn't. But when it comes right down to it, I know that she will. You'll be able to count on us both. And yeah, she says, my pleasure to help you. My sister will invoice you for my time. I was very glad that she charged. I was like, yes, please, definitely charge. So that is where things end with the two of them. Now let's talk about what happens with Margo and Josh and Fen. So what it turns out is going on is, I'm going to just like back up and start talking about Josh's explanation. He asks, is it spring yet? To which Fen says, Yellow Ferret Month. Yes. He explains, we needed better guards, so I created an annual tournament. First week of the month of the Yellow Ferret finds the 12 greatest fighters in the land to become our elite Centurion Guard. And we offered fame, glory, and instant wipe clean of your criminal record, including banishment marks. And Margo is like, oh, damn. Okay. So maybe we should just get on that. They go to Fillory, and she, for lack of a better word, prepares to audition. She has to sign up under an assumed name, and she is getting very twitchy because, as it turns out, in Fillory, there are 2 moons, and so she is facing a full moon much sooner than was going to happen, or a moon in the right conjunction, I guess, right? Is it a full moon that, like, what's the thing that happens where it's like you have to kill or fuck or else you die? But this is just a regular, like, transformation, right? If I'm not mistaken. So the 2 of them, her and Fen, both enter. And I love it because Fen sees this woman, like, playing with knives. And she's just immediately like, oh shit, yeah, I want to do this. I'm in. And then we find out a little bit later that Fen is also a little bit twitchy right now. Because it turns out that she also has this sexually transmitted disease. Because it turns out that she and Josh hooked up. And now Margo is in this place because of her wolf PMS, where she's already not feeling super hot. She wants to kill things. She is really feeling away. And this on top of everything is really a bad combo. she and Margo each take out everybody else in this tournament. They are owning this competition. And eventually it comes down to the two of them up against one another. So they don't both get to be Centurion guards. They have to each fight it out the next day. And that's why, I've got plans because I have this STC, sexually transmitted curse. Margo gets a little bit more into it than Fen. Fen realizes that Margo is super pissed and that the chances of her making it through this alive are very slim. When Josh shares his concern, she says, I know how to properly lightly maim someone. Thanks for your concern. And I love Fen walking into this, like giving Josh a look like, oh, fuck, here we go. And at the end of this fight, Margo stabs Fen in the heart. And Fen thinks that Margo realizes that this is a child's play knife, which means that it's perfectly safe. But she doesn't actually know that. Margo stabs Fen and is immediately horrified by what she just did and backs off with this look like, I just ruined my own life. Like, oh my God, what did I just do? And poor Josh, he's watching this, like, looking like he's going to start crying. They both begin sort of cramping up at the same time. And this is when Fen sits up. She pulls out this knife, which, like, has blood all over it, but is still, for some reason, it did not, like, hurt her for, I don't know, magic, I guess. And she says that was so well played how you knew how to grab the child's play knife. And later on, when they are locked in their cages and have just recovered from being werewolves, Fen says, I'm grateful even in your complicated state, you still reach for the child's play knife. You're a good person. And Margo interrupts, I thought it was a real knife. And I'm glad it wasn't, but I'm not a good person. Fen tries again. Okay, well, matters of the heart can be irrational, and sometimes even the best of us. And she says, stop trying to forgive me. To which Josh says, we want you to forgive us. We promised ourselves we wouldn't give up on you, but we did. And you never gave up on us. And Fen says, yeah, you figured out a way. And this is when Margo says Eliot sent the letter. I was going to let you die for Fillory. But, kings, we have a job, and we put it first, right? And when she says that, she looks at Josh, who breaks eye contact. And this is when Fen says, so you didn't save us, and then you stabbed me. And Margo just nods. She owns it. Just as like, yep, that is correct. And this is when Fen says, okay, am I a fool? Am I? Like, I went into battle for you, thinking you gave a single flea on a donkey's ass for any of us, thinking that we owed you something. Stupid me. And honestly, it's really nice to see Fen being angry. You know, like, I really enjoyed this side of her coming out, this real rage, this and humiliation, the betrayal of it, you know. And Josh looks over at, after she finishes this little diatribe, Josh looks at Margo and sort of like just flicks his hands into the air like, you know what, fuck you. He doesn't say it, but it's all over his face. And he walks away, and you can see Margo just sort of like shutting down. And again, I don't feel like it's entirely fair, because giving up on people that you love for the sake of something else that's bigger is a really horrific decision to have to make. And I think ultimately she made the right call. It's just not something that you, as the party that got abandoned, wants to hear. But, and I think that comes because we're like, people are so used to seeing Margo as like the heartless one in a lot of ways and the ruthless one. But I don't feel that way about her anymore. And I saw how much she struggled with trying to let them go. She attempted so many things, and it all just wound up getting worse and worse. It wasn't for lack of trying. And again, Eliot had an idea that he could have shared with her, but he didn't. And so she forgot that was even an option. I don't know. While I understand they're being angry at her, I don't think they have the full picture, and I think she's shortchanging herself in the way that she chose to defend herself, or not defend herself, I guess. So, yeah, that's how things wrap up with them, and I'm just, like, wondering if Eliot is he going to sort of smooth things over, or try to, or will he sort of... I just wonder what his reaction to all of this will be, you know? And I really wonder what he is going to tell them about the Dark King. The Dark King says to Alice, "I hope your journey gave you everything that you needed. And please call on me if there's ever anything I can do for you," before he walks away. I don't believe that they ever exchanged names. So I don't think he knows Eliot was King Eliot. But regardless, this is a really great little moment. Like, I was delighted with him just leaving and there not being this big dramatic, like, off with their heads or anything like that moment. He's just kind of a guy, you know? I'm really curious who he is in the scheme of things, because I feel like there's going to be some reveal that he is someone, you know, but I have no idea who that could be. Yeah, I don't know. So anyway, I have actually a minute or two left, which is pretty rare when I'm covering this show. But there's not many people in the chat. I believe it was only Jessie who just said hi. So I think I'm just going to wrap up a minute or two early. I hope that you guys are okay with that. Thank you again to Jessie for commissioning this episode. I'm very much looking forward to the next one. I can't believe that this is is this the last season? This is the last one, right? I can't believe we're almost at the end of this. And I hope you all have been enjoying it. And I will be seeing you again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.